Hi everybody, welcome back to Left Foot Media. My name is Brendan Malone, and in this video we're going to be discussing a veritable cornucopia. Yes, that is a real word, I didn't just make it up, go and Google it if you don't believe me, of film and television shows that I've had the chance to cast my discerning eyes and ears over in the past few weeks. Now this has included everything from the Barbie movie, I almost threw up there, to True Detective Season 4, and the quirky new comedy Unfrosted, plus there's one or two other little gems included as well. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this smorgasbord of movie and TV reviews. And one last thing before we get started today, this is vitally important. No matter what TikToker Interstellar Ghost Hunter 93 tells you, don't ever look at the sun with binoculars. Very bad idea. Roll tape.
When you're up against the wall and you cannot fall, so go off, go off, go off. Go off, so go off, go off, go off. Go off, go off, go off, go off. Go off, so go off, go off, go off.
Before we start, if you haven't already, please hit subscribe. And also, while you're here, please click the like button on this video. All of that really helps the channel. Now, this obviously goes without saying, but there's probably also going to be various spoilers in this video. So if you don't want anything ruined about any of the film and TV that I'll be sharing my thoughts on today, you might want to shut this video off, go away, watch the TV series or the film, and then come back later. With that out of the way, let's get into it. The first thing that I watched recently that I want to talk about is the 2024 Netflix true crime documentary series called American Nightmare. And in a nutshell, American Nightmare is a 3-part series about a 2015 home invasion and kidnapping, which then quickly turns into a case of the couple who are supposedly the victims of this kidnapping and home invasion actually being accused of faking the crime. This was a phenomenal series. If you haven't seen it, you should watch it. I'll tell you why in just a second. I'm not going to tell you too much about it because that will give the game away. So one thing I'd say is if you don't know anything about this crime, definitely do not go and Google. Don't do any research, just watch the series. And the reason why is that I went into this not knowing much at all about the case, and episode 1 outlines what the supposed case is, and I think in my mind I've got it all figured out. I think I know what's happened. I think I know who the guilty parties are. Then with episode 2 we get a completely different perspective on these events, and all of a sudden my mind changes and I think, oh no, there's been some lying going on here. I know what's really going on. And so my view of this whole situation completely shifts. And then episode 3 rolls around and tells me the full story about what actually did happen. And holy moly, it was not at all what I had thought. I was completely wrong the whole time. I would highly recommend this. And the reason I would recommend this is because it actually is a really great object lesson about how when we are confronted by these true crime stories, we read about them in the papers or we see them on the news, it can be very easy to rush to snap judgments about who the guilty parties are, about what's gone on or what hasn't gone on. And in actual fact, quite often, we can be terribly wrong. Not just that, but sometimes something can seem really rock solid. Like, why wouldn't that actually be the case? You know, the old saying, where there's smoke, there's fire. Well, sometimes it turns out there's not actually fire at all, and we can be terribly wrong. And that's why I highly recommend this crime series to people, because it really does make you stop and think about how we approach crime reporting and how we, I guess, engage with these true crime incidents that we are confronted with on a regular basis in the news. It can be very easy to be reactive and rush to a snap judgment, but often that snap judgment is not actually correct. And this series really highlights why we definitely should not do that. So American Nightmare 2024 Netflix true crime drama, definitely worth the watch. Right, the next cab off the rank is True Detective Season 4, Night Country. I think it might also be known as True Detective Night Country or Night Country True Detective Season 4, however you say it. I really didn't rate this show at all. I should also say at this point that, as you can probably tell, this video is a little bit more off the cuff today. I'm just shooting from the hip, sharing my thoughts as I go, but I do have a few notes, and so you might hear my mouse clicking in the background. That's me just flicking to the next little prompt to remind me about what I have to say or what I think about this show. True Detective Season 4. Well, what can I say? Holy moly, this is a massive fall from grace. True Detective Season 1 was absolutely phenomenal. If you're a regular watcher of my channel, you'll know I've already reviewed True Detective Season 1, and I made a video, a very popular video it turns out, about what I think the deeper meaning of True Detective Season 1 actually is. It is a very well-crafted piece of television. It was one of those television moments that sort of came out of nowhere and completely reframed, I think, a lot of people's perspectives about what television could actually be. Very well filmed, very well written, big screen actors who are the main actors in this TV series. It was just phenomenal, all round phenomenal. The story is excellent. It tells the story of a pretty much a washed up, you'd have to say, but certainly very jaded, cynical and nihilistic in the worst kind of way detective who goes on a journey by retelling the events of his involvement in a previous crime, a series of murders, and then from there it delves more into the personal lives and the character development of those actual main characters and those who move within their orbit, and then it finally concludes with our main character actually abandoning his nihilism because he has this profound experience which leads him to discover that at the center of all things is authentic self-giving love. Now, I argued in my video essay on Series 1 of True Detective that this is a authentically Christian vision of reality. This idea that at the heart of all things is goodness, truth, and beauty. And that God is an authentic communion of self-giving love in the Christian vision of reality, and that's exactly what our main character encounters in Season 1, or at the end of Season 1 of True Detective. Well, Season 4, holy guacamole. This thing was a shocker, and I'm not really sure where to start, so let me just throw my thoughts out there. There's no denying the expense that was poured into shooting this and the cinematography and visuals. Funnily enough, though, having said that, I don't think they were quite as good. Everything's not quite as sharp, I don't think, as the first season, but it's still pretty good. It's right up there, very well filmed, and the whole atmospheric idea of being in a perpetual state of night and confusion and darkness really adds to everything. But the storytelling in this is just not great. The misandry in this series drove me bonkers. It is so far removed from the first series. This one is just so hyper-politicized. The first series was not, and this one just went the complete opposite way. So there's the misandry, the anti-male stuff, it's just all through this. Didn't rate it, totally unnecessary, and quite clearly just hyper-politicized preaching, which is obviously not storytelling. Now, if you're going to focus on storytelling, you would actually probably write things a little bit differently to how this series was written. Like, the writing in this in places is just really forced. So instead of things just sort of naturally flowing because of the previous event, something else happens, and then because of that, something else happens, and then because of that, something else happens. Instead, what we end up with are moments in this series whereby the characters do things that just don't make any sense, but they have to do them because they need them to do those things that don't make sense in order to execute the next part of the story they want to tell. And it was just frustrating. Some of the stuff was just so obvious that it completely drew you out of the storytelling in that moment. You're looking at these characters who live in this frozen tundra wilderness, and they are doing things like going outside in the middle of a storm. And you just know that they wouldn't do that. They would know enough to know not to do that kind of thing. There were reasons that weren't really reasons for things to be happening. There's this weird pseudo-supernatural stuff that's not actually supernatural at all going on. It was all just so bleh. On top of that, there was chemistry between characters that didn't really seem particularly believable. And a couple of our main characters, they just weren't very sympathetic and didn't seem particularly likable. The funny thing is, even though Jodie Foster's character has some more sympathetic moments, it just takes so long to get to that point that it's really hard to buy in as an audience member at that point. She's just so unlikable for a lot of this show, and it just doesn't, I don't know why it's that way. It doesn't need to be that way, it seems to me. It could have been written differently. She doesn't have to be all sunshine and roses. I'm not suggesting that for a second, but there was just chemistry between characters, and there's just the way these characters are written that just didn't quite work, I don't think, for what this series was trying to achieve. It's almost like they looked at season 1 and said, can we make a couple of really cynical female characters that are mimics of what we saw in season 1, rather than starting with a whole new set of characters and writing them from the ground up. It just felt a little bit too unbelievable and very much like a formulaic repeat in places of what we'd already seen in season 1. And I'd have to say as well that the central premise didn't really make a lot of sense to me. This idea of a group of scientists in a very cushy science job all of a sudden turning into barbaric, brutal murderers, like all of them, it just didn't quite make much sense. Now again, this is happening because they've got to craft this narrative built around misandry, but the actual execution of that, no pun intended, didn't actually really make a lot of sense, it seems to me. And in fact, I actually felt at times it was almost like someone had plugged in a whole lot of story points that they wanted into an AI and then said, AI, write me a story that's like True Detective, and it must also include environmentalism and colonialism and racism and patriarchy. And it was like a plug-in AI adaptation of what a story should be. It didn't really feel like something organic that had been well written. It felt like a whole lot of series of political talking points that had all been lumped together because the writer, the producers, the showrunners, whoever's responsible for creating this, was more interested in actually creating a political statement than they were in creating good television. The Rotten Tomatoes score is quite telling on this. The critics gave it 92%, hardly surprising, but the audience said, no way, ladies and gentlemen, this thing ain't worth 92%, it's only worth 56%. And I think that is a more accurate representation of how this thing actually rates. By contrast, the original season 1, the critics also gave that a 92%. The audience was slightly lower, but only just. They came in at around 89%. So it's very, very close. And I think that is an accurate reflection of a very, very good piece of television. This is just not great TV. If you think of this as something completely unrelated to True Detective, maybe, just maybe, I know some people have been suggesting that this is a way to actually stomach this series, then maybe, just maybe, you'll get away with it. But even then, I don't think it's the greatest of storytelling. So this one for me is, if you haven't seen it, probably don't waste your time. Certainly don't pay money to watch it. It wasn't great, and it definitely does not even come close, I don't think, to scaling the heights of season 1 of True Detective. The next thing I had the chance to watch, finally, a little bit late to the party on this one, was The Devil Next Door. And this is the 2019. Yeah, remember that year? The year before COVID? Before the Great Awakening? Yeah, that one. 2019 Netflix documentary series about the trial of John Demjanjuk. Is that how you say that? I think that's how you say it. Not an easy name to say. Who was the Cleveland dad, husband, auto worker, Ukrainian who had immigrated to America after World War II. And then he's actually accused of being Ivan the Terrible, the notoriously brutal Nazi death camp guard from the Treblinka death camp. Now, this is a very, very well-made documentary series. It's structured in such a way as to sort of bring you into the high tension and drama of all of the story as it unfolds. Like, I knew about this story, but still, watching the documentary series, it really takes you into the drama of it all. If you don't know anything about this particular incident in history, you will, I think, have a really, really good experience. Not just will you learn a lot about true history, but you will really experience the highs and lows of this particular trial and the journey that it went on. Because he claimed the whole time, I'm innocent, it's not really me. And so there's this big question hanging over everything. Is he really Ivan the Terrible, or is this just the worst case of mistaken identity ever that's going to result in the potential execution of an innocent man. So there's a lot at stake in all of this, and the documentary does a really good job of sort of bringing you into all of that. It is a very, very engaging watch, and I think it also, more importantly, raises some really big and important questions. One of the big themes in this is the question of justice versus revenge. And sometimes people can be very fast and loose with those two concepts, and they can treat them as if they are interchangeable. They are not. They are very different things. And in this case, there is a very pertinent question that is raised here about, is this justice, what we see unfolding in front of this, or is this motivated? And understandably so. We're talking here about the victims of one of the worst atrocities that was perpetrated by a modern secular state in our entire history. So it's pretty horrific stuff. If you're the victim of the Holocaust, or your family were the victims of the Holocaust, it's horrific. And if you're someone who survived that in particular, because this case, which happened in the 80s, did involve the actual testimony, the eyewitness testimony of Jewish survivors of the Holocaust. And if you're someone who survived that, you can understand why you would be very, very focused on wanting justice and even maybe revenge for what's happened to you and your family. But it raises that question. It's an important question. Should we actually allow vengeance to become more of the dominant focus, or should we hold firm to those principles of natural justice, even in the face of great evils like this one? And I think, of course, the answer is yes, we should. Because in actual fact, that is what makes us different from those other awful, evil regimes. If we maintain a posture and a commitment of virtue in our dealings with even the worst of the worst, that is how we are enabled to actually say we are on the high moral ground here. The way we live and the way we structure and the way we act as a society is different from those other evil, barbaric regimes. But that question is put, and it's put to the audience, I think, in a very, very good and very effective kind of way. Nothing's really laboured in this. There's nothing overly politicised. It just raises the questions, which I think is really, really good. It puts it in the sort of mind of the viewer and then leaves them to contemplate. It doesn't try and force you to come to a particular conclusion. And the other thing that it also raises is a serious question. Again, it doesn't draw your mind as the viewer to a particular conclusion. It just puts the question to you and then leaves you with it, is the nature of this trial and the way that it took place. This was a very public trial, and there's no doubt that the public nature of this trial only added to the tension and only created a situation whereby there was a very, very high risk of a miscarriage of justice taking place. It's actually quite interesting hearing the testimony of the judges from that first trial. If you haven't seen it, I won't spoil anything for you, but hearing their testimony, and quite clearly, I think they were very emotionally invested. In fact, I would say far too emotionally invested in this case. And you can't help but sense that the public pressure of this public media circus was feeding into that. It became this thing whereby even to actually defend this man, as one Jewish lawyer does, as a defense lawyer, was considered a betrayal of the nation of Israel. It was considered to be a betrayal of the victims of the Holocaust. And you know at that point that something's not quite as it should be when that's going on. But again, this documentary series, very well crafted. It takes you on the journey. You feel the drama and the tension of this journey. Is he? Is he not? Is he guilty? Is he not guilty? Is he really the man they're claiming he is? Is he innocent like he's claiming? And it's, mistaken identity, all the rest of it. You feel all that tension, and also those questions that are put to you as a viewer. They don't force anything. They just put the questions out there, and then they leave you to discuss at the end. And I think there's a very pertinent point that's made at the end about the selective nature of what happened to those Nazi war criminals who immigrated, particularly to America after World War II. And why was it that only some of them actually found themselves being targeted for accountability and to be held legally accountable for their involvement in the Holocaust, while others weren't just left alone, but they were actually given prime position within the post-war America and were even celebrated for their position within the post-war America. So very, very good documentary series. Highly recommend it. Right, the moment you've all been waiting for, the Barbie movie. Yes, I did watch it. I was watching this film the other night. My youngest daughter came downstairs because word got around the Malone household that Dad was watching the Barbie movie. And for those who don't know me, I have 4 daughters and 1 son. And so word got around pretty quickly that I was watching this film. My youngest daughter, who is 8 years old, comes downstairs and she says to me, "Dad, are you watching the Barbie movie?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "I thought you said that was trash." So yeah, I was put on the spot a little bit by my daughters. They couldn't quite believe that I was watching it. My eldest daughter, who's 17, was like, "Oh, Dad." She actually went to see this months ago when it was actually in the movie theaters, and she didn't rate it at all. But I thought, I've got to watch this for myself. I've got to get a sense of what this movie is and what it's not. It is kind of one of those pop culture icon moments, and I want to be clear in my mind about what this film is all about. Holy moly, I think most of the criticisms, those people who have been critical of this film, most of those criticisms are pretty much on the money. It was quite astounding to me that a film could be both riddled with ugly misandry, the anti-male stuff, and also misogyny, the anti-female stuff, at exactly the same time. This film, this is some sort of achievement. They've managed to do both. Now, the film, as you probably know if you've seen it, is just riddled with the anti-male misandry. But what some people have missed is that even the female characters are actually looked down upon. Think about the Barbie world and those female characters in that Barbie world. They are so stupid in this movie. They're supposed to be scientists and judges and lawyers and everything else, but they're absolute bimbos. And they are so idiotic that a dumb Ken doll who literally describes his job at the beginning as beach, because he spends all his time sitting on the beach. That's what my job is, beach. He goes into the real world, then comes back, and he convinces these supposedly smart, intelligent Barbie women to abandon their former way of life and set up a patriarchy, a literal patriarchy, just with a few simple words. Basically, these women are idiots, and that's how this movie portrays them, as being absolute idiots. So the men are idiots, the women are idiots. Everyone's an idiot in this film. It's just such cynical self-loathing about the world and about, I guess, male-female relations that just no one comes out of this actually with any sense of goodness or hope or truth. There's nothing like that at all. It's just jaded politics of the worst kind, the gender wars involving Barbie dolls. And it's just, I mean, I don't know what else to say about this film. Basically, every male in this is either a one-dimensional character or a villain or an absolute idiot, and the only ones who are spared that treatment are the trans Barbie. So you've got a man who's pretending to be a woman. He's all good, he's safe. And the Ellen character who presumably is supposed to be gay. I'm just assuming that. It's not explicitly stated, but I'm assuming that. So they're the safe ones. Every other male in this is either a one-dimensional caricature of a villain or an absolute idiot. There's no real regard for the goodness of masculinity in the world. Not great on those stakes at all. And you sometimes go, okay, well, I expect this. This is the politicized, cheap propagandizing that we get now instead of storytelling. So I'm prepared to accept that this is part of it. But what I would normally expect to see out the other side of this is maybe a conclusion, an end point where we say, well, in actual fact, both extremes are wrong. We shouldn't denigrate men, and we shouldn't allow men to become these usurpers and users of women. There shouldn't be patriarchy, and there shouldn't also be misandry. Neither thing is good. That is not where this film ends up at all. And funnily enough, one of the really noticeable things for me was the fact that it really hated, the enemy here is not really men. The ultimate enemy here is male-female complementarity. Men and women cannot be together as equals in this movie. None of the male-female relationships are presented in that kind of way in this film. They're either women are better because they're in a position of dominance over men, and men have just got to apparently, I guess, suck it up. Or in the real world, there's the evil of women being oppressed by men, or men are not part of the picture at all. Women are just going their own way to such a degree that, as you've probably already heard from other commentators, the film starts with the bashing of the baby dolls and that rip-off scene from 2001, Kubrick's scene about violence in human history, and wow, they're not very subtle about that, the smashing of the babies. And the one character who is consistently loathed by every other character throughout this movie is the pregnant Barbie doll. And it's very noticeable. It was very, very stark that one particular female posture, if you like, the full outworking of the feminine genius, a pregnant woman, was the one character who is consistently treated with loathing by everybody, and everybody thinks that is actually normal and good to do. And so it's really clear what's going on here. Men and women shouldn't be together. Men and women can't be together. There's no complementarity. Will Ferrell is basically just playing the same character that he played in the Lego movie. It's Lego Movie Guy 2.0. There's really not much about this film that I found particularly rewarding or enjoyable or even redeeming, but there was one feature, and it was kind of ironic actually, and that is the character of Ken, played by Ryan Gosling. And without Ryan Gosling's Ken, this movie would have bombed big time. It just wouldn't have worked. It would have been a flop. I am certain of that. He actually carries this movie, and there are key points at this film where his involvement, basically the story really does hinge around him. It's sold to the viewing public as a Barbie movie, but really it's actually Ken's story. And there are so many key moments in this where Ken is the difference. He is the sugar that really sweetens things up. And I don't know of any other actor, by the way, who could have actually played this role. There are other actors they probably could have put into the role, but I don't think they would have been able to actually pull this off, because what you get with Ryan Gosling is this all-American sweet boy next door thing. And so it actually works, and it works really well. He's a very, very sympathetic character. He is a character that you actually find yourself rooting for. I've actually spoken to a lot of women who said that Ken was their favourite in all of this. So I don't know if that was quite the intention, but that's how it came out. And in the end, as I said, this movie just was not that great. It's not that great. I'm glad it didn't win any Oscars. It got some design Oscars. I should have Googled that before I came on. But it didn't win any major Oscars. And all this hype about this film being amazing and it's so well written, no, I don't think it's true at all. In fact, the film ends with Barbie going her own way again. There's no course correction, and it doesn't even really make sense when you think about the ending of this film. Like, I found myself asking at the end, why? Why has Barbie gone into the real world? There's this real shoehorned in, ham-fisted, hey, let's turn this into a Pinocchio story that happens towards the end, and all of a sudden Barbie is magically being turned into a real girl because that's all she's ever wanted to be. But she kind of hasn't actually wanted to be that, because she went to the real world and discovered that the real world was not actually a good place, so she didn't want to be there. And when the Barbie land had been turned into a very distorted version of the real world, she sets about trying to restore order and put all of that dysfunction right. So why would she want to go back to the real world, which is basically the place of the enemy? It's horrible, it's not a good place. She doesn't want to go there. The whole thing that motivated her to fix Barbie Land was this recognition that there was something wrong in the real world. And so when Barbie Land is distorted in this way, we've got to put this all right. But all of a sudden, she is now fixated on actually going into the real world. And so she goes into the real world. But why? Again, why? She's fixed Barbie Land. Barbie Land was this great and wonderful utopia. It's the place to be. So why wouldn't she be there? This thing just doesn't make sense. The real world is evil, apparently. Barbie Land is actually now as it should be, but Barbie doesn't want to be where life is as it should be. Instead, she wants to go to the real world where things are evil, and she sets about on a journey as per usual. No male-female complementarity. She goes to the gynecologist to get herself sorted out, I guess, and to have a baby without a man, because who needs a man for that kind of carry-on? And yeah, it was garbage. I'm talking around this, man. I'm looking at my notes here, awkwardly trying to avoid eye contact with you as I tell you that this film, it was garbage. There were no sympathetic characters in this film apart from Ken. Ken was the most sympathetic and engaging character in this whole movie, and it's called Barbie. So, what can I say? If you haven't seen it, don't waste your time because you're not missing out on much at all. If you get a chance to watch it on a rainy Sunday afternoon without having to pay any money, which was my story, then yeah, you can get away with it, but only out of interest, I would suggest. There's really not much of merit in this film, and at the end of the day, I think it's a very forgettable movie. Even if you were really staunchly, militantly feminist, I can't imagine you'd come out of this film really hyped. It seems to me that so much of the hype around this movie was just manufactured hype. It was marketed hype. It was social media hype. It was everything superficial and vacuous, but then when you go and actually watch the film, there's one or two moments, but there's not as a whole. No, this is not the best. Not worth watching. Don't waste your time. Last but not least, I want to talk about the very recently released Jerry Seinfeld comedy movie, Unfrosted. This is a quirky comedy set in the 1960s about a war between two major cereal companies to be the first to develop the next big breakfast cereal product. It's actually a lot of fun. It was a movie that the trailer didn't do it justice. I watched that trailer and I thought, this actually looks really bad. It didn't look good. The trailer that I saw about a week before the movie was released on Netflix didn't look great. And so I wasn't expecting it to be anything good. And then I know someone who actually watched the film and said it was actually quite a good little quirky comedy, not much in the way of politics. It was just quite enjoyable. It's the sort of movie that you don't see much of anymore. And so I thought, oh, that's interesting. I might give this a go. And so I watched it over the weekend, and it was actually a pretty good little quirky comedy. They were right. It is the kind of film that you don't see much of these days at all. So, Unfrosted, definitely worth watching. What did I like about this movie? Well, basically, this is a vehicle for Jerry Seinfeld, obviously. He was the director. I think this is his directorial debut, if I remember that correctly. He was also obviously one of the stars of this particular film, but effectively he is kind of the what's the deal with airline peanuts? He's that guy. He wanders around basically this movie being the observer who is observing all of these strange and quirky events happening around him, observing the challenge, the struggle, the race to become first to develop the next breakfast product, observing the risks, all that sort of stuff. He's the observer. And it's great. There's all these quirky characters who are around him who are doing the quirky things. He's almost kind of like the straight man, but not quite, because this is a bit of a quirky comedy. And it actually works really, really well. He's good in the role that he has, but so are the other people around him. And I never thought I would actually say this because there's some really interesting casting in this. So Melissa McCarthy is great. And there are films that I've seen her in that I thought, ugh, no. They didn't make sense, they weren't watchable, and I found her frustrating to watch on screen. Not in this film, she's perfectly cast. It actually works really, really well for her to be playing this character. There is also Jim Gaffigan. Jim Gaffigan is great in this. I've always enjoyed most of what Jim Gaffigan has done. This is no exception, but he's actually really, really perfectly cast in this. He's great in the role that he has. He plays it well. And I would almost describe him actually as being the main character. The trailer leads you to believe that it's Jerry Seinfeld, but I think, as I said, Jerry Seinfeld is more the observer. And I think really that you could make the case that Gaffigan is actually, well, if he's not the main character, he certainly is one of the leading characters in this film. And you know who else was in this who I normally have no time for at all, but I actually think worked in this role? And that was Amy Schumer. She actually works in this movie. They gave her the role of a cynical, villainous heiress of a big cereal company who's willing to do whatever it takes, steal, lie, cheat if she needs to get to the top of the pile. It is quirky. It's set in the 1960s. She's just got that sort of extreme eccentric exuberance that you would expect to see in a character like this, and it actually works with her playing this role. And I'm saying that as someone who does not like her comedy. I find it pretty basic and in fact not even that funny. A lot of her stand-up comedy, I've seen her in other previous movies where you think this doesn't seem that believable, but in this movie she actually works. It actually works really, really well. Now there is one thing though that I found really frustrating about this film, and that was the moments of really crass humour that just seemed so tonally inconsistent and out of place. Now, I don't just say that because I don't appreciate this kind of stuff and what I think otherwise would have been a really good, safe family film. It's a very rare movie, this one. There's just no politics. Well, there is one moment of politics, but it's so tongue-in-cheek that I think even the people who are being made fun of probably would have had a laugh. And this is where the character of Hugh Grant dresses up as the buffalo horns guy from January 6th. He's not in a buffalo costume though, but he is the buffalo horns guy. But it's done in such a way that two things are important here. Number one is it's not so time constrained. It's not like they're making a historical reference to the here and now that in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years time won't make any sense to a viewing public. It's actually more subtle than that. So you could still watch this even 50 years from now and you'd still enjoy it, you'd still have a laugh, even though you might not get that reference in the film at all. Because the reference is just that. It is a passing reference. It's not a political film. It's not trying to promote political messaging, so it doesn't make the reference the main point of those particular scenes. It's just a passing reference. And as I said, it's done in a light-hearted way where I think even they could get on board with it. The character who does this, Hugh Grant's character, he's not a villain, he's not unsympathetic as a character, and so it just works. It's done in a very light-hearted kind of way. But basically the thing that I really found frustrating about this film, this very quirky comedy that could work well as a family movie, a nice, safe family movie outing, is ruined in that regard in one or two places with this dodgy, sexualized humor. And there are a couple of jokes I remember just thinking, why is this even in the film? Again, it's not just because I find the lack of virtue frustrating and I don't think you actually need it, but I think also it was just so tonally inconsistent. The rest of the film is not like this. So when you've got a joke about JFK sleeping with and getting two twins pregnant, the Peppermint Twins, in a movie where you've also got these little rascal type characters, this young boy and this young girl, who by the way are great in this. It's, basically think Macaulay Culkin, Home Alone, the Little Rascals, that kind of a character. So you've got that kind of a character, and then you've got these dodgy sexual innuendo jokes included as well. And it just didn't seem tonally consistent at all. So I don't know why they included it. It's a sign, I think, of a culture that's in a state of collapse. And maybe our standards have slipped so much that people think, like in the filmmaking industry, that this is normal now and that you've got to insert this sexualized stuff, otherwise somehow that's not normal. It really isn't, but if you're a frog in a pot and the culture has turned up the dial on the deviancy, then you're not going to recognize that and you're going to insert the stuff into your movie. I really wish they hadn't done that, because otherwise this would have been a really, really good and safe family film for all ages. Unfortunately, there's a couple of moments that really let this movie down in that regard. However, this is still a really good film. It is a rare breed, a movie that is actually a standalone, quirky comedy. There are sexualized jokes, but it's not hyper-sexualized. A lot of those comedy movies now just depend on the really, really dodgy, obscene humor. This is not one of those films. It's not full of politics. It's just a fun, quirky tale. And if you're old enough, definitely, I'd highly recommend this film. It was an enjoyable watch. I was actually kind of surprised because, like I said, that trailer that I watched, the last trailer, it looked like it was going to be utter garbage. This film wasn't garbage. It's well worth the watch. So I applaud you, Jerry Seinfeld and co. Excellent filmmaking. Well done. And hey, Hollywood, if we could see a bit more of that kind of stuff, I think we'd probably all be a lot happier about what's going on in cinema right now. That's all I really want to say, apart from one last thing. If you want to support these videos or throw a few metaphorical coins in the metaphorical violin case, you can do that via our Patreon page or one of the other links in this video description. Thanks again so much for tuning in. Don't forget, live by goodness, truth and beauty, not by lies, and I'll see you next time on Left Foot Media.